Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Arthur's Roundtable. I say it every time, but I am super grateful for everybody who's paying attention and listening in. And it's not easy to scrape up an hour's worth of time. And so we certainly appreciate you listening in. So thank you for that. So Tim and I met through somebody else who we interviewed, his partner, Brian Adams. And so we got acquainted and thought it would be a good idea to do this. And I think you'll also think it's a good idea to listen in. So, Tim, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, Arthur, great to be here. Thank you for including me as a guest on your program.
You bet. So let's start at the beginning.
Like the beginning?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, you can give us the Reader's Digest version.
That sounds perfect. I started off in Florida, and my mother and I were driving down I-95 one night when I was 9 years old, and she said, "Your dad wants us to move to Denver, Colorado. What do you think about that?" And it was March of 1979. And I said, it was starting to get hot in South Florida. I said, "Well, do you think I can have a dog?" And she's like, "I'll talk to your dad." And I negotiated this great dog named Bucky out of it that we got when we arrived in Denver. And he lived to be 22 years old, which is pretty remarkable.
That's a long time.
Yeah. But
That's a good bargaining chip. I mean, how smart was that? I mean, it wasn't a big deal for your parents, I guess, but all right, I'll move for a dog. Nice deal.
yeah, you've always got to be negotiating, right?
Right.
On those things.
Kids are the best.
But I had no idea how much that decision to move to Denver was going to change my life. Denver was really such a remarkable community in 1979 and, through the 80s. And it was wonderful to be in junior high school and high school and, just have the outdoors right there. And, really just the Mountain West in
Yeah.
general is a wonderful place culturally. As you know, you're in it.
Yeah.
So you get to experience that every day.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then went to Colorado State University and loved that. When I was worked for a company called American Power Conversion, which was one of my first companies out of school. And I was back in Rhode Island for our national sales meeting. And this is now, I'm fast forwarded a little bit to where I'm 24 years old. And our vice president of sales said, "What do you think about moving to Australia for us?" And I said, "I'd like to check it out." And he goes, "Well, there's a trade conference in Melbourne and Sydney over a 2-week period. Why don't you go check it out?" So I did. I was like, "Hey, this is pretty cool being in Australia in the mid 90s when you're in your early 20s." And yeah, and then I moved to Australia and came back and then I was back in Denver not too long after that, and went to work for Cisco Systems, where my life really changed. But that was a quick 28-year span in 5 minutes. But I did bring up my dog in Colorado State, so those are two important
Nice.
things.
Nice. So did you Systems gave you technology, networking, SaaS chops?
I learned a lot at Cisco Systems that would be what I would call on the field and off the field related. Working for John Chambers was phenomenal. He was an incredible strategist. And I worked for the telco operations side of Cisco. You had enterprise, which is what Cisco historically was. And then after the 1996 Telecom Act passed, and you had all 400 of the competitive local exchange carriers that could now provision services, against the regional Bell operating companies back then. John felt that the future of Cisco Systems was going to be with these telecommunication companies, that they were going to transform the world. And he was right. I mean, it really did transform the internet at a whole different level, and it transformed the way we communicated and the way we transacted and how much bandwidth was available. And then when I say off the field, it was, if you believe, like Jim Rohn says, that we're the average of our 5 closest friends, being in a community like Cisco, where everybody really pushed to be, the like at the highest level of excellence in everything that we did. I think it really gave me a great perspective and foundational, that kind of next level. I talk to my son about this a lot. He's 23. And he's a year out of college now, and he's really been learning in this new role. But I said, I want you to think about something. The same way wealth compounds with the rule of 72, right? That it's going to double at 10% every 7.2 years. It's the same thing with the relationships, Jeb, that you're making, with the experience that you're gaining, with your network, and who's in that network are also compounding the same way. And by the time you're 30, you're going to have this incredible perspective, this incredible network, and a lot of experiential growth that's come with that all together. And Cisco, for me, was right there where it would have been that first time things were really compounding after graduating from college and just being around phenomenal mentors. And so I think it really prepared me for what would come next in my 30s, where I became a CEO of a variety of operating companies. But if it hadn't been for Cisco, I would have never met my wife. We would have never had our son. I would have never had an opportunity to be able to start my own companies at the magnitude and level that my father-in-law really extended through having a family bank be embedded in the family office. It was a incredible privilege.
Isn't it really interesting when we hear, and my biases are going to be revealed, that the people who have not had to work environments like that or meet a payroll or have employee relations issues and benefits, that they really don't understand how enriching it is to build a company, not just monetarily perhaps for the founder or the CEO, but in so many tentacles that it goes out and builds families and gives people the opportunity to, you know, interact with people that raises your own level. I mean, it's what it's all about when it comes down to it.
It's a huge, I agree with you, Arthur. It's a huge component of how we self-actualize. I really believe that. It's interesting, right? Back to wealth here. If you put money in an account and it's in an ETF, you really don't have to do anything, right? I mean, the market does what it's going to do, and that ETF sits and compounds. But relationships and experiences and how we decide to invest our time, and and people who are in our family and next generation related things, like all of that requires hands-on investment. You can't be, there's nothing passive about it.
Active
It's all
management, right?
it's all active management. That's exactly it.
I admit that when I was at the beginning of my business career, whatever that was, I was just so driven to run through walls to get done whatever had to get done. I didn't really realize you know how you read a book and you go, holy shit, that's exactly what I was trying to think about. And they put it into words and it means so much more, right? Now that somebody articulated in a way that didn't necessarily validate what you were thinking, but put it in context, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at some point early on, thanking many people that were, I was fortunate to be around, talked about making the relationship deposits in your relationship bank account, right? Not contrived, but, thinking about it that way. Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to spend my time, you know, at the pub or the bar hanging out with these idiots? Or am I going to go over here and try to improve my lot in life by hanging out with people that can uplift me? Like, I actually had the opportunity to have that realization at a reasonably early time in my life, which I'm grateful for.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So it's all, and we'll get to it, but that's largely what you're doing with two of your companies in many ways.
Very much.
I have to ask you a question because you and I, perhaps even more me than you, remember. And I had my first cell phone from the Baby Bells, from one of the Baby Bells. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
It was.
and did Chambers? I mean, he was really right, but in retrospect, was breaking up the baby bells good for society?
I think it was incredibly good for society.
How so?
I don't think the regional bell operating companies had any motivation outside of what the regulators were telling them to do to expand the amount of data and throughput and create the capital expenditures of building the infrastructure that we have today. I mean, we completely take for, I think, I'm speaking of me, Tim Brown. I think we completely take for granted the raw horsepower that comes out of fiber optical networks now, that comes out of the data centers and how they've been optimized, how AI works now. And I mean, we're just in the first inning of AI. And when you look at cell phones and what 5G did, or frankly 4G, to developing nations around the world, or you look at like Web 1.0 was about reading. Web 2.0 was about two-way conversations, right? And some transaction. And Web 3.0, right, is about it all coming together. And none of that would have happened with the R box. It just because they were all oligopolies. And
Yeah.
I just don't think you would have ever had the motivation. And you look at Quest Communications when I was at Cisco and I had Quest, the inspiration behind Quest was a fiber optical point to point link from Sacramento, California to Los Angeles, California, of this small little department at the time called SP Telecom that, was had been around, I think, for a long time within Southern Pacific Railroad, and it was made possible because of the Transcontinental Railroad Act of 1869 said if you put down track, you get 5 miles on both sides of the rail track, including mineral rights, and so you had the right of way to put down fiber optic. And then you had MFS come in, you had Quest come in, you had cable and wireless come in. You had a lot of these companies that put up big capital expenditure dollars to transform, everything. I think John Chambers, back to that, and I'm sorry, I don't want to get off on a tangent by any means here, but I think John Chambers had it right. There's always something lost in translation when you go from one language to another, right? And you also have the lag time where you're translating from one to another. And so with John, he said, the old telecom architecture of these class 4, class 5 switches that are all circuit based, they're running an old architecture. We're going to do native voice over IP using routing based technology. And instead of having these large switches or private branch exchanges running old technology, we're going to do everything packet based and make it look just like data, but we're going to prioritize it. And then there's nothing lost in translation like you had on a Northern Telecom switch or a Lucent switch or an Ericsson switch. Everything was integrated into the one architecture, and it just became a function of your software doing it. And it completely revolutionized I mean, do you remember when people used to call on Sundays because long distance was cheaper?
People, sure, I remember that. People used to have
Yeah.
party lines in their house with their neighbor, right?
So
I mean,
that is exactly it. Anyway, I probably went way too long on
no,
that
that's
one.
okay. I was fascinated by that because when you think about, so Mark Andreessen is thinking that even though we've laying all these fiber and continue to lay all this fiber, is that the bandwidth from Starlink is going to so get exponentially better that it's all going to be satellite and it's going to be everywhere, right? I mean, I'm not arguing one way or another, but that could make sense, right?
No, I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
That's why I think when you're looking right now, there is this space race going on because I think whoever controls space is going to ultimately control defense, is going to control a lot of AI. That is really the next frontier for a lot of strategic reasons to the world. I mean, it's fascinating, which I think dovetails to the point you just made.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's, look, I don't know about the science, but trying to pay attention on some level, but it's easier to go up and back than it is to go around, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's for sure.
yeah, it's pretty wild. And this whole AI stuff is just mind blowing. How quickly it's moving. It's just, you know, even the sort of pedestrian everyday stuff that you would have somebody do and be happy to pay them to do it because it was economically made sense for, to have them do it, whether it's an analyst or a design person or, just doing, you know, drudgery work that you just needed some sort of technical skill that the learning curve was too great for to do it yourself. And not that you should, but I mean, you just tell it what to do and it does it. It's like, and it's almost instant. And this whole inference thing is, I mean, it's just out of control how super efficient things can get. And it's all kinds of arguments about data centers and people losing jobs and all that kind of stuff, but it's unstoppable, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's the equivalent of standing on a beach and holding up your hand and expecting to stop a wave of water. Like, I
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. And say it for the good of society, right? I'm making fun of people, but it's like it's coming. It is the wave.
I agree. But I think there'll be a lot of opportunities we can't see yet that also come from that.
Tons. I mean, even in the short term is, good prompters can be exponentially more productive than bad prompters, right? And it's only because I listened to it recently that I'm bringing up Mark Andreessen again. But there's this whole thing happening in Silicon Valley. It's called AI vampires. Like all these people realized how productive they can be with AI, and they were typically programmers, writing code, and they don't want to go to sleep because they can get so much more done in the period of time that they're saying, well, wait a minute, I don't want to sleep. The project I wanted to do, if I stay up another 2 hours, I can get it done. And it would have normally taken me 6 months. Like there's this whole emotional excitement that's going on with these people that were normally getting paid to write code, and they don't have to write code. They just come up with ideas now and have somebody else write the code, right? Not
No,
somebody else.
it is. It's very interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. All right. So go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, I recently read a news story about a guy who recorded himself on Zoom, like in with different backgrounds and different clothes on. And he basically, for like 6 or 9 months, would be have AI put him on these different calls where he would just be there. And it wasn't him,
Right.
And then somebody finally figured it out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I interrupted you. I
Well, no,
interrupted.
I'm just, it's, this is not my original thought, obviously, but for anything that is can you be used for good can be used equally as for bad, right? So, I mean, this happens with everything, right? Look at what your example, the eminent domain for the railroads. Well, you just lost part of your farm on 10 mile swatch on either side. Is that good or is that bad? Well, it depends on where you sit, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So let's talk about, take one at a time and give us the intention of the business and then how it's going and what would be helpful to you.
Thank you. Well, why don't we? A common question that I get has to do with Somos22 and Fortaleza. And number one, what was the reason behind founding both communities? Number two, what's the difference between both communities? And number three, why are you doing it? So I'll go through all that
Great.
with
Let's
you.
do it. Yeah.
Brian Adams and I have known each other for a long time. We met through YPO. And then we became forum mates, but we were also going to a handful of family office conferences where he was representing another single family office that was family oriented. And I was representing another family office that I was consulting with, which is my former father in law's single family office. And you end up getting a lot of good perspective about how are events run, what are the objectives of the events, what are people taking away, And it was about the same time that I was finishing up what had become a 5-year tour within YPO of being the vice chairman of the investing network and then becoming chair of the investing network, where we grew to over 6,500 members of that network inside of YPO during my tenure. And we also created these things called personal investing forums, where it was principals who predominantly were Gen 1, were having liquidity events, were creating family office like structures for the first time, and really wanted an opportunity to be able to talk about, what do I do next? How do I talk to my children about wealth? How do I best prepare things for 10 years from now, for 100 years from now, whatever kind of thinking might be, and also integrating foundations and a lot of times what's next. Like there's a great book that Bob Buford wrote several decades ago now, called Halftime, right, where a lot of the skill set that we use to be successful in life, we go into halftime and kind of create what's next. And many times what we realize as we move from success to significance is that the same skill set that made us successful in business can be directly applied to how we give back and however we want to define that. So those were all conversations that were bundled up. And so Brian and I founded Somos22 and Fortaleza in April of 2024, having spent a lot of time inside of those communities and really just seeing how things functioned. And the interesting thing about the family office world is that for many, many years, family office communities have generally been organized more around events. They've been around speakers, panels, the exchange of information. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we saw was that there's also a lot of responsibility driven isolation that occurs in the family office world because it is so opaque, so private, so siloed that it can be very difficult to compare notes with other people. Because if you get trust wrong in the family office world, the downside to that is asynchronous. So whether you realize it or not, many times people I'm running a close to the vest kind of strategy, which is a risk containment strategy around relationships that I have. And what Brian and I said is, why don't we focus on, let's create a community where we can have families experience what we're going to define as connection capital, which is a varying degree of high trust relationships from sort of the starter level up. Starter level being what we do a lot of times in Somos22 sort of basic events. Jeffersonian dinners that we do are kind of a next level up, and Fortaleza that is invite only would be sort of the pinnacle of that, where it really becomes high functioning peer to peer type community, but that's smaller and more intimate, so that you really get to know the same people because you're interfacing with them a lot. And so the name Somos22, Somos 22 is we are the 22nd century. And the thesis was, it kind of dated back to another single family office in Colorado that I consulted with for 3 years, where the chief investment officer was trying to help me understand the way their family office viewed time. And he said, you have traders that view time in seconds, and you have analysts who view time in quarters, and you have fund managers who view time in 5-year increments. We view time in generations. And so we don't look at IRR. That's not as important to us as cash on cash, as example, as a metric. And so that was really the thinking with Brian and I was, let's create something that is 5 generations from now focused. Hence the name Somos22 of we are the 22nd century. 100 years from now, 5 generations out, what will this look like? And so 2024, we had, I don't remember, maybe 14, 16 events. 2025, we had 54 events, all in person. This year, we'll go over that. And I think of it this way, that we curate what I call a private trust network. We have a very specific set of rules about how you engage inside of that private trust network. You have an experiential architecture that a lot of that's what I developed when I was the chairman of the YPO Investing Network that allows you to go broad and deep. And the output of that is that you compound trust at a faster rate than you would outside of that community.
which totally makes
And
sense.
yeah, yeah. And so, I'm not trying to compete with other family office communities. We think it's great that other people are members of those and that we coexist very well. We're just focused on different things. And I think a lot of times I'm speaking again from my experience. I would go to a lot of family office conferences. I would see a lot of very helpful speakers and panels. I'd meet people. And then 2 days later, I would forget who I met. And then kind of life gets in the way. Maybe you follow up, maybe you don't, maybe you have some, conversations a couple of weeks from then. But generally speaking, the relationships that you invested time in at that conference reset 3, 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road when you see them again. And so we wanted to try to create a way that was a different approach to it. And so Somos 22 is very broad in its orientation of connection capital to high trust relationships. Who knows me, shares my values, understands aspects of where I'm coming from, right? Steps forward if things get complicated instead of stepping back. And then we created Fortaleza to be a vertical invite only sleeve, if you will, inside of the broader Somos 22 organization for families who were looking for, again, more frequent contact with the same people, wanted to go deeper, wanted to have, what I would call a very similar to like a YPO experience, but with other family office professional managers and principals and next gen. And that's really the community that we've been building, so that you don't have to explain what a private trust company is. You don't have to explain what endowment style portfolio construction is or getting into bill pay or how you aggregate things into Addapar or just other aspects to running a family. Like everybody already knows how to do that when you're in those conversations.
Is it fair to say that Fortaleza allows those people who run the family offices to have meaningful conversations about those things, for example, that you just mentioned?
It does because now you're in a broader community, but it's still small enough to where you know everybody. But we also have forums that are subgroups of 8 people inside of that community who really become your personal board of directors. And you meet in person with them 4 times a year for 4 hours, plus, some Zoom calls throughout the year. So people really get to know you, but a holistic side of you. They know not just what you do professionally, they also know about your family. They know about you personally. They know about background details that make you uniquely you.
So, is it fair to say that the family office events, conferences in particular, are designed the way they are out of necessity because somebody has to pay for it, right? And
Totally. Yep.
while the outcomes that you're mentioning that are problematic, which is you go, you get some good intel from speakers, you meet some good people, and then life happens and you go back to whatever you were doing. If you doesn't matter how good you are with follow up or how compelling the conversation is, you tend to, you know, go back to whatever you were doing in the interim. The solution that you propose is let's start with meaningful intention of having those relationships begin and continue. Is that fair?
It is. But I also want to just be clear about something. I mean, a lot of the family office business models that are conference related are sponsor driven in terms of the P&L and how it works. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's one way of doing things, and they serve an important place in the world. Like it is information that people need. A lot of the service providers who are at that conference are highly qualified and exceptional at what they do. And so I don't for a second want to say that that is an important aspect to this. We were just simply looking at, instead of focusing there, why don't we focus on how do we just deepen relationships, knowing that people that came to our events, we're going to gravitate to both. Like we're not trying to have people not go to regular conferences
Of
anymore.
course. Yeah, yeah.
It was just more of a how do we balance that?
Yeah, and this isn't about me, but I will tell you that there was a few times where I was helping other, including family office conferences, promote what they were doing. And I got emails saying, you know, aren't we competitors? And why are you doing this? And I go, why would I care if somebody found value in what you were doing? And if all I did is let them know that it's there and they took advantage of it, how's that a conflict? I see that as actually the opposite, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so I think there's room for everybody. There's no question about that.
We're on the same page,
Yeah.
definitely on that.
So how does it, one of the things that Tiger 21 was really good at, maybe still is, I don't know, because I was at the beginning of all that, got to know them at the beginning of all that, is they did do the quasi, because the people it built that, I think came out of YPO. And so the model of having a group of people that you get to know better on a long-term basis worked well for them too, right?
Yeah, I think what made and still makes Tiger 21 one of the most exceptional communities globally for what they do. And I'm a massive fan of Tiger 21 and of their founder Michael Sonnenfeld and the team. They really pioneered a whole new space with their portfolio defense. It was really brilliant, right? Because you were in a room with other principals. You put together your short-term goals, your long-term goals, your entire portfolio. You talked about your trust and estate. Many times your spouse or partner who would be invited to that might see that for the first time, the whole thing. And then you were in a room with people where nobody was trying to sell you anything and everybody was there to try to help you see blind spots that maybe were inconsistent with what you said your goals were, but with how you were investing both, your treasure, talent, and time, all of those. And that I think really took off. And, the Vistage model that Greg Wells brought into Tiger 21 as the chief operating officer, I think it has been outstanding. I mean, where he was prior to that, and just that peer to peer learning around wealth and a lot of the complexities that come from that. So that's a great example where I think, when you're in a trusted smaller group of people who you see on a regular basis, where you share something in common and a lot of the same language, you can create a lot of connection capital. You can create a lot of depth within that.
Yeah. The number one question that I get, it's not a question, a request, is I have a problem and I want to talk to somebody else who has had this problem with a similar fact pattern adjacent to my advisors that is likely to be a peer, to ask them how they handled that. And that is the number one thing, at least in my little world, that I get to be part of because of others, that people ask is, I've got this fact pattern. I want to talk to others who have experienced this and ask them how they handled it.
I I think what you're talking about is really where the magic is, right? There's something so special that comes from experience sharing at that level because it is so unique. And I think when you look at the number one request, Brian Adams and I, all we do generally most of the day is we talk to people who are professional managers, principals, or advisors within the family office ecosystem. That's really our world. And that's probably the number one request that we hear is, I'm more interested in just meeting other people to experience share with. Again, because it is so siloed and a lot of families are wanting to build what I have kind of coined the word private trust network
Yeah.
because, large institutions, once upon a time, I think you could go and they would help curate a private trust network for families. I don't think that exists at the same level that it used to. And I don't think there's ever been a time more important than now with so much change going on in the world. You go back to 30 minutes ago in our conversation about AI. And the world is changing so rapidly right now. I mean, I you just look at the events that have happened over the last 100 days or the last 6 months in the world,
Last
and just
30 days.
30
Yeah.
days. Yeah, and the geopolitical ramifications that has everywhere.
It is. Do you remember when we used to look at Ray Kurzweil and he would tell us about exponential growth?
Absolutely.
And he would say, over the next 10 years, well, what he predicted in the next 10 years happened in the last 6 months on some level, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
It's
and yeah, it's interesting too, right? You also look at, where is a safe place? Not just a safe place structurally, but safe place where I don't need to worry about someone in my family being hurt from a war that's going on. Like there's all these different components now that affect different places in the world. It's an
what
interesting time to be alive.
is, I think it's an amazing time to be alive. Certainly interesting. An anecdote, I have friends that were, I would say, some of the most worldly people you would know or want to know or in this world. Consulate General of Luxembourg to North America, lived in New York City, lifetime diplomat, lawyer, smart guy, moved, got a big post to become the ambassador from Luxembourg to Russia, lived in Moscow for almost 10 years, moved recently to Dubai about 3 years ago, and just moved out of Dubai to Hong Kong because of what's going on in that region. Right. And so on one level, it's like, holy cow, what happened to Dubai? And I'm not opining about Dubai because I really don't know. I'm just giving you an anecdote. But it's pretty amazing that you can do that, right? Like you can get up and move, right? There's lots of things around that that might prevent that from happening, but you just, it doesn't justify the stuff that's going on in the Middle East. But, okay, this is not working out. It's kind of like, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. You just move, right?
It also, I think, again, this is a neutral statement, right? Geopolitics drive asset classes,
No doubt.
right? And, and it just, I think the cycles, like if you believe, in the 80-year cycle, like it's a very interesting period of time that we're in, post 2020 into the next 80-year cycle. I'm, of course, using a US perspective on that 80-year, but the rate at which things are occurring now is unbelievable. It's also exciting. I mean, we may see in our lifetime because of AI and because of robotics and because of all these things like cures for diseases that we never thought could be cured before. And, the empowerment of you know, many people around the world who would have never had that. It's an incredible time, but to your point from a couple minutes ago, to be alive.
And we already have seen that AI has solved math problems that the best mathematicians in the world haven't been able to solve. And they've done it in a matter of months. It's like, it's happening. And so it's reasonable to expect that what you're saying will come true, is that we'll cure some of these diseases just because the heavy lifting has been compressed from this to this, right?
It is interesting though, like when because I write a lot about, as I think you recall, I write a lot about mental fitness. And, the one thing that AI is not going to help us with is, being in community with other people, that connection with other people. And, we are relational beings and it's important for us. I wrote a LinkedIn article about the barbelling of relationships, and on one side you have all the people that you've known since you were born that are family and close friends that you grew up with. And on the other side, you have all these people who are the family that you have picked over time and the people who really stretch you. But if you look, a lot of us spend time in the middle because that's where business a lot of times is conducted. And if many times I think why people in their 50s and 60s can be incredibly lonely is because this side over here of people who we've known since we were children, they're dying
Yeah.
just by nature of getting older,
Yeah.
right? And so it's that the size of that side is reducing, and then on this side it's reducing if you're not spending the requisite time, right, to invest in those relationships, and you can find yourself in a real predicament, and I wrote about that because I found myself in that predicament over the holidays in December. I was like, wow, like I have really created something that I didn't see coming.
So that's
And
interesting. But you're actively in business, so you're engaging with people maybe in the middle area, but it bleeds over to the people that stretch you, does it not?
it does, but I'm an introvert by background. I'm not an extrovert. So when I'm done having, when you're like Brian and I are, we're on calls all day long. We're talking to people all day long. There's a lot of movement between cities and things like that. So when it's alone time for me, I really just try to disconnect because it's where I recharge.
Yeah.
And so the challenge to me going into this year was, how do you put aside time for me to be with my son, who's 23, and to make time or relatives who are still alive that are older than me that I care about, because it's easy to put it off.
Yeah, it was really easy to put it off. Again, just anecdotally, I didn't do this by design, but my kids went to college. I got divorced, moved from Villanova to New York City, and ended up being a playboy for, you know, over fantasizing that for 27 years. But as soon as my kids, three of them finished school, they moved in with me in New York City. And so my solution to the problem, which I didn't even really design, was I wasn't going to have a meaningful relationship with another woman for a long time simply because I didn't want to. But it opened up the door for a period of time, for a long time, where my kids live with me without any incumbent woman. How about that for being harsh? And, had lots of girlfriends and all that kind of stuff. In New York City, it just happens. But then my girls lived with me. Then they moved to Brooklyn, and my son lived with me for 2.5 years, and we did everything together. It was amazing. Like I wouldn't trade that off for anything, right? So,
I love it. Thank you
it
for
was,
sharing that.
yeah, it was really just. I mean, I look back on it and say how grateful, and they loved it too. It wasn't like I was imposing on them. It was like, wow, we're in New York City. Let's just do it, right? It was amazing. So, but I totally get there's a lot of lonely people, Tim. I mean, there's a lot of lonely people.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. I
There's,
Yeah.
there's a notion that some of these lonely people will attach themselves to an AI as a stopgap, right? There's a lot of talk of that going on.
That there's a lot of opportunities for us to come together in humanity to support one another
Yeah,
differently.
no doubt. So you don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about. But what is the business model for the two businesses? Are there, you don't have to say what they are. So it's like, are there fees? Who's paying for all this? How does it support itself so it can stay meaningful?
Yeah, so we'll start with the first one, which is Fortaleza. Those are dues based,
Yeah.
and so each of our members pay a yearly dues,
Yeah.
and we prorate those based on if they come in partially throughout the
Yeah.
year,
Yeah. Pretty
and then
straightforward. Yeah.
yeah, and then related to Somos 22, when Brian and I first started this, we had on one side a very well respected North American based C-level family office recruiter, and you had an entire community of wanting a safe place to see people that you knew, and for them to meet other people, which we've touched on that a few times, right? Of that desire of people in our industry to meet other people, and for me, what I have done has been looking for opportunities for the Anschutz Investment Company. And a lot of times you will see those through other families who refer that. to, and then having a network in regard to, working with families, both doing capital formation around private equity or private capital or those types of things, and also having a safe place for my network to come. What that has evolved into is now we have a co-host for our Somos22 events in a city who are a paid co-host. And with that co-host, we integrate them into everything we do. They're at the dinner table for the Jeffersonian dinner. They're at our coffee connect or at our cocktail reception, or the needs and leads, but it gives them an opportunity to meet everybody. And if you have the right rules system within that container, then everybody is relationship driven and not transactional driven. And so that's one area. And then the other side to do it is the consulting work that I do, where you're curating what I call, again, private trust networks. And so a lot of that may be introductions that I'm making to specialists or other families or other opportunities. And I think these private trust networks really are where access, information, opportunities, ideas, these things come to families that you would not get through kind of traditional institutional players. And so I have been building an entire business around the curation of private trust networks. And Somos 22 is a component of, our own private trust network of people who come and where we meet a lot of very interesting people and help create connection between that.
Is the private trust network catalyzed by you seeing dots that need to be connected, or that somebody is saying, okay, I see the value in a trusted network, help me do it?
Yeah, I work with a family as an example where they came to me and said, we just want to club up with other family offices. We want to invest in operating businesses. We don't want to be promoted. We want to meet other families who are putting their own capital at risk. And, you've got a great network of different opportunities that you're seeing and also families who are stepping up and where there's an alignment of capital at risk. And we'd like to meet them. And, they're not raising any money. They're 100% buy side allocators.
Hmm.
And what I'm doing is helping them go directly to other family office principals and C-level professional managers who are engaged at that level. So that's an example where we're helping them accelerate what it would look like to meet other families for them to be able to club up.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And back to the events that the Jeffersonian dinner, for example, give us an example of the profile of somebody that's good for you to be that paid person for something like that. Or is it idiosyncratic to who you know? Right.
I think partners for us tend to be outsourced chief investment officer related roles a lot of times, or very relational, and they have a lot of perspectives because they are trusted counselors with other family offices. And just by nature of having lots of conversations, they've accumulated great wisdom through that. And so when they're at the table and I'm asking different questions because I write a different run of show for every single Jeffersonian dinner we do. It's those partners who really can lean in and give input at a level where people can identify and connect. Again, it's completely different when the dinner that you're having has nothing to do with transactions and has everything to do with governance, next generation, engagement. 100 years from now, it has to do with complexities of wealth. It has to do with note comparing on, different seasons in life that you may be going through. And that's really where it's great to have a partner at the table who it's kind of interesting. There's this book. I don't know if you ever read it, called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
I have it on my shelf.
Yeah, and so on chapter
And
one,
I've also read Rome, by the way, early on. Amazing, amazing. Yeah. What?
yeah. So I mean, in chapter one of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he's writing the difference between being on a motorcycle, feeling the wind in your hair, the vibration of the motorcycle, the curvature of the earth, the leaning in and out. That is the equivalent to being in the movie. And being in a car with the windshield and shocks and everything like that is the equivalent of watching the movie. And that's the same way when I design experiential architectures. I want everybody there at the table to be in the movie. It doesn't help anybody to have somebody feel like they're bolted on.
Server only. Yeah.
And I learned that from John Chambers at Cisco Systems. John was always like, everything needs to be integrated. And so that was, like I keep going back to all these other points in our conversation, but back to like an hour ago, that was, very much his philosophy.
Yeah. Love that book.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I was introduced to that book when I was 17, which was quite a long time ago. And I used to race motocross, and I thought it was about motorcycles. And when I realized it wasn't, I threw it aside and didn't read it. And then I read it maybe 20 years later, and then again recently. Yeah, it's great, great stuff.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions.
Yeah. So it's always nice to have a partner. What was the idea of you guys throwing together? Like the whole was better than the parts?
This is Brian and I.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were YPO forum mates, so we really got to
That's
know
right. You
each
did say
other.
that. Forgive me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, really well.
Yeah.
And we were in the habit of having a lot of conversations where, that 1+1 = 3, where you're able to challenge people by the kinds of questions that you're asking and by, really drawing out, like you get in that forum experience. And then when you start going to a lot of the same events that has nothing to do with the forum and what you do professionally, you can kind of take that same construct and apply it in that world. And then we were sitting in a lobby, a hotel lobby in Palm Beach. And, I literally brought out a sheet of paper and the two of us just started architecting what we thought it could look like. And, it's grown parabolically on the Somos22 level since. It's a relatively simple formula just in
Yeah.
terms of being focused on how do we generate, it's pretty black and white. Do we generate more connection capital for everybody or not?
Yeah. Seems like a lot of work, Tim.
It is. Yeah, it is a lot of work. But
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about it. And as a father of a Gen 3 family, someone that's going to be very involved in family, I believe in operating businesses of the family and the family office and the family foundation. I think this is a way as a father to be a better counselor to my own son, just by nature of being in an ecosystem where I'm always in conversations that that I feel sharpen the saw.
There's no doubt that you'll glean benefit from being in the rooms, aside from the other people benefiting from you curating those rooms. But there is even the rub off is going to be worth it, right? Really.
I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So this has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I
it's
wish
been a
we
lot
could,
of fun, Arthur.
I wish we could talk more, but I will admit to you and everybody else that I've got a little bit of a time crunch here. But that was amazing. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for doing this.
Well, to be continued.
For
So
sure.
grateful, Arthur, that you'd have me on your podcast, and we'll keep on keeping on.
Yeah, and we'll do it again for sure. Like soon, we'll do it again. There was a lot more to talk about. So
Fantastic. All right.
thank you, Tim. Thank you,
Have a
everybody,
great
for
afternoon.
joining us today.
Thanks. All right.
Hang
Be
on
well.
one second.